Well, you Lutherans are about as close as you're coming, aren't you? Which will be fine and dandy. I know half of us are amplified, and I'm not. Reverend Dr. Zeigler here has put me in the most embarrassing position I've ever been in my life. I swore probably 8 years ago, maybe it was 16 years ago, that I would never stand in front of people with an electronic gadget in my hand and read off of it. And now all of you do it, but you know, once I turned 47 2 years ago, and now it's my job. So thanks for this moment. Thank you very much. And it reads like this: Reverend Dr. Michael Zeigler began serving with LHM as Speaker of the Lutheran Hour October of 2018. Can that really be? Prior to that, he served as pastor of Epiphany Lutheran Church. You only preach one season a year? Oh, that's kind of nice. Easy job. An assistant pastor at Timothy Lutheran Church, both in St. Louis. Before becoming a pastor, he served as an aircraft maintenance officer in the Air Force. Michael grew up in a military family, living throughout the U.S. from North Dakota to Alabama, Virginia to Colorado. His family moved 11 times before he finished high school in Springfield, Missouri. He graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 2001. Where's that located? That is a prestigious place. Good for you. With a general engineering degree and served 5 years in the Air Force following that. He left active duty in 2006 to prepare to be a pastor at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, completing his Master of Divinity in 2010 and a PhD in 2014. You are one ambitious guy. Bless your heart. He continues to serve part-time as an Air Force Reserve officer at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois and as a guest instructor at Concordia Seminary. Michael and his wife Amy have 4 children. They must have names.
They do. Hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, it's Josiah, Elise, Titus, and Jude.
Ah, very nice. You name them together, or were you in charge of that?
I had veto power.
You had veto power. She did well. Amy enjoys being a homeschool and a Sunday school teacher, cooking, crafting, and being a catalyst for events aimed at strengthening bonds between family and friend. As we all know, the speaker shoes are big shoes to fill. Am I right? Yes, I'm right. And Pastor Zeigler fills those shoes exceedingly well with a style all of his own. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Dr. Michael Zeigler.
Thank you, Kevin. There's a little-known story that comes out of the 1973 District Convention of the Alabama Lutheran Laymen's League, in which none other than Forrest Gump was up for consideration to serve on the board of officers. Now, the Lutheran Laymen's League of Alabama is a pretty tight-knit group. They didn't even have elections like you all do. They just had consensus, and it was the good old boys club as they do it down in Alabama, and they just had to decide if Forrest was going to be worthy of serving on their board of officers. And so they brought Forrest into the room and they said, Forrest, we just have 3 questions for you, and if you can answer these 3 questions correctly, then you can be on our board. And he said, okay. He said, okay. Question number 1. Which days of the week start with the letter T? Question number 2, how many seconds are there in a year? Question number 3, what is God's first name? Well, Forrest, he didn't know what to do. He wasn't ready for a test. And so, as his mama always told him, that if you didn't know what to do and you were feeling overwhelmed, then just get a good night's sleep and try again in the morning. So he asked for a day to think about it, and they gave him a day. Came back in the next morning and they said, all right, Forrest, time's up. We want to hear your answers to these 3 questions. Question number 1, which days of the week start with the letter T? Forrest said, well, there's 2 of them. I know that. I said, okay, Forrest, could you tell us which 2? He said, that's easy. Today and tomorrow. They said, okay, Forrest, we'll give you that. Well, what about the next question? Question number 2, how many seconds are there in a year? And Forrest said, had to think about that one a bit, but it's 12. They said, 12? How in the world did you come up with 12 seconds in a year? And he said, well, that's easy. January 2nd, February 2nd, March 2nd. I said, okay, Forrest, stop. What about question number 3? What's God's first name? He said, that one's easy. I learned that in the song. His name's Andy. He said, Andy? How did you come up with Andy as God's first name? He said, it's the song. Andy walks with me and he talks with me, tells me I am his own. Yeah. So a good thing is you don't have tests to serve on the board of Lutheran Laymen's League here in Minnesota South. It's so good to be here with you all, and I want to talk to you about your convention theme, making disciples, sharing Christ's love. And that's what the goal is of the Lutheran Hour. That's what we have been doing for 92 years. 92 years since the first broadcast, October 2nd, 1930. We're in our 89th season because we did take a 2-year break during the Depression. So I just preached episode number 8933, which is for Easter. We have to work a ways ahead, and we get them all in the queue so we can send them out to the roughly 1,800 radio stations around North America that broadcast the Lutheran Hour today. And it's, as you know, it's the longest running Christ-centered broadcast in the world. And no signs of stopping. We're going to keep going, keep doing it. And I'm so blessed to be able to serve in this position. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the Lutheran Hour, but more in the bigger sense of our small part in the church's mission to do just that, to make disciples and by showing the love of Jesus Christ, which is your theme. So I thought what we could do today is talk a little bit about the history of the Lutheran Hour, talk about some challenges. And we heard from Dr. Johnson, challenges that the church faces here in your region, but there are challenges across the board, and we should be honest about those. And then whenever we're faced with insurmountable, impossible challenges, the best thing to do is just to fall back on Jesus. So we're going to listen to some of the story of Jesus and work together. I'm going to ask you all to work in partners. So if right now, if you look around and you're not sitting next to at least one other person, I'd ask you to rectify that. Make that right. I'll give you some time to do that because you're going to have a partner. Everybody needs a partner in this exercise. So if you see somebody who's by themselves, maybe go sit by them. And if you want to move closer, you're welcome to move closer. We don't need to use all the pews, so you're welcome to do that. So we're going to work in partners. And we're going to converse some because you all gave me an hour and 15 minutes to talk. And so I don't want to just be talking for an hour and 15 minutes after lunch. So we're going to have some conversation between all of us over the next hour. But we're going to be listening to the story of Jesus because that's where we learn how to work through and live through and see the light in the midst of our darkness and our problems. We just have to go back to the basics. Keep hearing the story of Jesus. And we're going to listen to the story of Jesus from the Gospel according to Luke. And I want you to take it in with your ears and not with your eyes. We're not going to read it, but you're just going to hear it. I'm going to try to bring it to life for you over the next several minutes here. And that's what I want you to react to see what part of the story gets you. And then along the way, I'm going to offer, I want to hear your insights from what you hear from the story of Jesus, particularly in our challenge of making disciples and showing his love in this place and this time. And I'll offer some of my insights along the way and then talk about some of the ministries and resources that Lutheran Hour Ministries as a whole offers to help us do this, make disciples and show the love of Jesus. All right? Sound like a plan? Okay, everybody got a partner identified? Okay, or 3, you could do a group of 3, that'd be okay. All right, first thing, quiz. Let's see if you can name all of the former speakers of the Lutheran Hour. Let's hear some names. Hoffman, Olson, Meyer, Klaus, Seltz, Yeah, so there's the Meyer with an A and the Meyer with an E. Okay, we got 6. Schultz, yeah, sometimes we forget about him. He was an associate speaker. He was kind of a bridge between Hoffman and Meyer with an E. We're missing 2 other guys who are often forgotten. Now we got Klaus. Let me show you their pictures. We got both Meyers. So here's the guy everybody knows, Dr. Walter A. Meyer. Served as speaker from 1930 to 1950, 20 years, really set the program on the trajectory that it's continued on today. He was speaking to as many as 25 million people in a single broadcast. He started it in the golden age of radio, and we caught that wave, and we were one of the very first church bodies to really go 2 feet in, and he did wonderful things. And we can continue to celebrate what he started. So here the next guy is the guy we often forget. Served for 40 years as a speaker of the Lutheran Hour, Spanish. Remember him? Yeah, Melendez. He was the Spanish speaker of the Lutheran Hour for 40 years, and we don't ever want to forget his work. And so I want to honor him by concluding him in the count. So 1 and 2, and then I think we missed this gentleman as well. Dr. Lawrence Aker. He served very shortly, just after, remember, Walter A. Meyer had a heart attack suddenly and died in 1950, and Dr. Aker served for just about a year and a half as an interim speaker. And then we did mention Dr. Oldson. He served for about 2 or 3 years. And then the other guy that everybody knows, Dr. Hoffman. Raise your hand if you met Dr. Hoffman. All right. He's a wonderful man. I never had the privilege of meeting him, but I've heard many, many stories about him. And then associate speaker, Reverend Wallace Schultz. He continued to serve alongside the next gentleman, Dr. Meyer with an E. And then you all know Dr. Klaus and Seltz. And then Zeigler. So I'm number 10 of 10 speakers of the Lutheran Hour, and it's an honor, it's a blessing to serve. Raise your hand if you have, do you listen to the Lutheran Hour on the radio? On the radio? Okay. Do you listen to the Lutheran Hour on the internet? All right. Do you know that we have a Lutheran Hour app? Raise your hand if you have a smartphone. Should be everybody, right? Everybody's got a smartphone. You can listen. A lot of people tell me, "Oh, I can't listen to the Lutheran Hour because it's not on the radio stations." Like, wow, we have an app. So if you don't have an app, this is just a screenshot of my phone, and you can see my son Titus is right there in the bottom left-hand corner. My son Josiah, you can see his neck. But there's some pictures of my apps. The Chosen, by the way. Raise your hand if you've seen The Chosen. You should check out The Chosen. That's a really powerful TV show, internet show about the life of Jesus. Very well done. But just above that, The Chosen is TLH. That's the Lutheran Hour app. That's got all the sermons. You can just tap it on your phone and listen to the sermon whenever you want. And if you haven't downloaded that, I recommend you just you can go to your Google Play app or your Apple app store and just search the Lutheran Hour, and you can download that. All right, and then the other thing you can do, there's daily devotions there on the left, the light blue one. How many listen to the daily devotions? Okay, I know they send out emails, but for whatever reason you don't get the email, you can just listen and read on that app as well. And then all of those What About books, or not What About, Project Connect books. So they're topical, dealing with different issues, maybe addictions or angels or Mormons, or every single one of them is online and in that little app right there, so you can access them at any time. Yes? Are the Spanish translations on there also? In the devotions or the booklets? I'll check and see if they are. I can pull it up on my app, but I'll get back with you. Okay, that's right. Okay, so just be aware of those resources. You can have it all on your smartphone, and check it out. Let's talk about some challenges, though, that face not just the Lutheran Hour, but the church at large. And I don't want to dwell on the challenges, but we should be honest about them before going forward. So, first one I have up there is the medium. And what I mean by that is radio. The Lutheran Hour started on the radio. It's still primarily a radio program. That's still where most of our listenership is. But you don't need to do a lot of study to realize this, but not as many people listen to the radio anymore. You know, we are not in the golden age of radio. That peaked in about 1950, 1945. That's when Walter A. Meyer was doing it. And he was, like I said, broadcasting to as many as 25 million people in a single broadcast. We reach under 1 million. So what we're learning is that we need more radio stations to reach fewer people. And it's just, so we're about 5% of what Walter A. Meyer was speaking to. That's just a reality of the medium. Radio is not as used as much. And the internet, people say, well, let's just put it on the internet. Well, the internet is a big and noisy place. It's hard to be found on the internet. And so that's another challenge of that medium. We weren't as quick to get into that medium. So that's a real challenge that we have. We're just not getting the same reach as we did in the early years, in the golden years of radio. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is with the messenger. It's not just that the Lutheran Hour speaker has big shoes to fill, and I'm no Oswald Hoffman, and I'm no Walter A. Meyer. I don't mean that. That's true. But what's more challenging is the way younger generations relate to voices of authority. We did some research with the Barna Group a few years ago, and we learned that when we asked non-Christians, with whom would you want to have a spiritual conversation with? So a conversation about God or faith. Less than 1 in 10 said that they would want to have a spiritual conversation with a religious professional. So people who are outside of the church don't want to hear from someone like me. They're less likely to listen to the voice of authority on the radio than they were in 1946 or 1950. So that's a real challenge. And then the last challenge, manpower, we could just say human power, I mean man in the sense of human, is that, okay, if they're not going to listen to me, then maybe they'll listen to you. Well, the other thing that we've learned from Barna is that Christians, 3 out of 4 Christians are reluctant to talk about their faith. So 70% of Christians these days don't have spiritual conversations with much frequency. I'm not even talking just outsiders, but even with other Christians, they don't talk about their faith. They maybe come to services and participate passively, but 3 out of 4 Christians aren't talking about their faith. So big challenges in the people, the priesthood of all believers, in the authority figures of the church, and the medium, it's specifically for the Lutheran Hour. So like I said, I don't want to dwell on these challenges, but I want to be honest about them with you before we go forward. And to me, I think about them and they seem impossible. They seem insurmountable. And so the one lesson I keep learning over and over again is that when I face impossible challenges, I need to fall on Jesus again and again and again and again. So that's why what I want to do most of our time as we try to look for the light in the midst of this darkness is to go back to the story of Jesus. This is the heart and life of who we are as disciples and disciple makers, is to hear who Jesus is and what he's done. Okay? So that's what we really want to do. And it being Lent, I want to retell for you much of the Passion narrative from Luke chapters 22 through 24. We're going to go into Easter. We're going to break the rules and go into Easter. And like I said, I want to think of this as like an old school Bible study. When I say old school, I mean pre-printing press. So let's imagine we're back in the 1st century and there's no printing press and there's no, this technology, the book hadn't been invented yet. And the church got along without this technology, and this is a technology. The church got along without this technology for about 1,500 years. It wasn't until later into the church life of the church that we had printed Bibles that we all read. Now, this is a great gift, and I thank God for it. But for now, I just want you to just set it down for a little bit, and let's go old school, pre-printing press, and take it in, because you know how the church heard the story of Jesus for most of its life was someone retold it. Word of mouth, they heard it. So we're going to practice that. And this is where you need a partner, because I want you to participate in this retelling. I'm going to tell a little bit of the Passion narrative, and then I'm going to ask you to talk with your partner, and then we'll talk together, and then I'll tell a little bit more, and we'll do it again, and then I'll tell the end. And that's how we'll spend probably the next, 30 minutes or so. So here's your first thing, is put your shoulder on your partner, or your hand on your partner, your hand on your partner's shoulder, not your shoulder on your partner. Put your hand on your partner's shoulder and look at them in the eye and say, would you be my partner? Okay, so we've all identified our partners. Pastor Joel needs a partner. There's the threesome, then we can make twos. Say, would you be my partner? And then here's what I want you to do. After you listen to the part of the story that I'm going to tell you, I want you to look at your partner. You put your hand on their shoulder again and say, the place in the story that got me was, and then you fill in the blank. And then after you share for 15, 30 seconds the place in the story that got you, and I'll let you define whatever that means, got you, just struck you, whatever. The most important thing that you have to do after you say that is you have to say to your partner, what's the place in the story that got you? And then they talk to you, and they tell you, and then after they tell you, here's the next most important part. You got to say, well, why did that get you? And then they answer the question, and then they say to you, well, why did that place get you? And we're just going to talk. We're just going to talk about the story, and you'll see how naturally this comes when you have freshly heard it with your ears. Okay? Make sense? All right, so let me get a drink of water here, and I'm just going to tell you the story of Jesus. Yes. We can talk about that. So you're listening for the place in the story that gets you. Now, the day of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was drawing near. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking some way to dispose of Jesus because they were afraid of the people, because the people were listening to Jesus. And Satan entered Judas, who is called Iscariot, even though he was one of the 12. And Judas went out and discussed with the chief priests and the temple officials as to how he might be able to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted. And they offered to give him money. And Judas consented. And he went out and began to look for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them in the absence of a crowd. Now it was the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus said to Peter and John, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." And they said to him, "Where do you want us to go to make preparations?" And he said to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large upper room, all furnished. Make preparations for us there." And they went out and found it, just as Jesus had said, and they prepared the Passover. When the hour came, Jesus was reclining at the table, and the apostles were with him. And he said to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Because I tell you, I will not eat of it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." And then he took a cup, and he gave it to them, saying, Take this and divide it among yourselves, because I tell you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine again until the kingdom of God comes." And then he took bread, and when he had broke it, he blessed it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is being given for you." And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup and gave it to them, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is being poured out for you. But look, the hand of the one who is betraying me is with mine on the table, because the Son of Man is going away just as it has been determined, but woe to the man by whom he is betrayed." And they started discussing with one another about who it was that would do this. And then an argument broke out among them about which one of them was the greatest. Jesus said to them, "The leaders of the Gentile nations act as lords over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them and are called good workers, but not so among you. Let the greatest among you be as the youngest, and let the leader as the one who serves. Because who is greater, the one who's reclining at the table or the one who serves? Isn't it the one who's reclining at the table? But I myself am among you as the one who serves. You are those who have stayed with me during my time of trial. And I assign to you, as my Father has assigned to me, a kingdom, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel." And then Jesus said, Simon, Satan has demanded to have all of you, to sift you all like wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, so that your faith will not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." Jesus said to him, "I tell you the truth. Before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me." And then he said to them, "When I sent you out with no money bag or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything?" "Nothing," they said to him. But he said to them, "But now I say to you, whoever has a money bag, take it, and likewise a knapsack. And if anyone does not have a sword, let him sell his coat and buy one, because this scripture must be fulfilled in me, that he was numbered with the transgressors, because what is written about me is coming to its fulfillment." And they said to him, "Well, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. Is that enough?" And he said, "It is enough." Then Jesus went out and entered into the Mount of Olives, as was his custom, and his disciples followed him. And when they came to the place, he said to them, "Pray, so that you do not fall into temptation." And withdrawing from them about a stone's throw away, he knelt down on the ground and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but thy will be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven to strengthen him, and he prayed all the more earnestly, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. And after rising from prayer, he returned to his disciples, and he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray so that you will not enter into temptation." And look, while he was saying these things, a crowd, and Judas, the one called Iscariot, one of the 12, was leading them, and Judas approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, are you actually betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" And those who were around him, when they saw what was about to happen, they said to him, "Lord, should we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck. The servant of the high priest took off his right ear. And in response, Jesus said, "Enough of this." And touching the man's ear, he healed him. And Jesus said to those who had come out against him, to the chief priests and the temple officials and to the elders of the people, he said, "Have you come out as against a bandit? Day after day when I was with you in the temple, you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour and the authority of darkness." And they seized him and led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest. And Peter was following at a distance. Now, when they had kindled a fire and sat down in the middle of the courtyard together, Peter also was sitting among them. And a servant girl, when she saw him sitting there in the light, she looked at him carefully and said, "This one also was with him." But he denied it. He said, "I do not know him, woman." And a little while later, someone else, when they saw him, said, "And you are one of them." But he said, "Man, I am not." And a little while later, about an hour later, someone else started insisting, saying, "Certainly you are one of them because you are a Galilean." But he said, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." And in that moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the words that the Lord had said. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out away and wept bitterly. It's the gospel of the Lord. All right. So I want you to say to your partner, you can decide who goes first. The place in the story that got me was, and then you ask, what's the place in the story that got you? Go for it. All right, I'm going to give you more time to keep talking because we're going to listen to some more. But first, I just want to hear if you could summarize your conversation or your reaction to what you've heard so far in one word. Would you say it out loud? One word to summarize what your reaction was or something you heard in the conversation. One word. Amazing. Trust. Denial. Others. Sacrifice. Yeah. Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Yeah. What else? Say again. Overwhelmed. What else? Weak. Yeah. Betrayal. Any others? Solitude. Unhelpful. Corruption. Right. So, what the passion narrative has done to me is I've learned it by heart. And I've learned it as Mark tells it, as John tells it, and now I'm learning it as Luke tells it. And each of those three, and I'm going to hopefully get to Matthew at some point, but each of those three does it in his own way. And I would encourage you to go back and listen to one. And instead of trying to jump back and forth between gospels, pick one and really just follow it through. Because Luke has things that Matthew, Mark, and John don't have. And he includes things that are very interesting. This whole thing about the swords, Lord, is that enough? 2 swords? And you'll hear more things that Luke includes, or you'll hear things, maybe as we keep going, you're like, oh, what about that? He didn't say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Well, that's not in Luke's story. So each of them are telling the same story from 4 different perspectives. So I just encourage you to go and maybe listen to Luke, because that's what series we're in for this year in the lectionary. So what I see in the passion narrative is narrowing down to one man. And everybody else is failing. Everybody else is falling away. And it's really one man on a mission, our Lord Jesus. And it comforts me when I hear this, is that even the foundation of the church, the 12 apostles, they all failed. They all ran away. They all didn't get it. And so Jesus can work. If he would work with them, then he can work with us. There's no challenges too big. He's on a one-man mission to put the world right, and he's done it at the cross, and he's going to keep doing it. So that's one place of comfort that I find. Another insight that's related to our problem, and maybe this comes to the comment about how most of us are German, or many of us are German. What did you mean by that, Jerry? Okay, so you didn't want to move, okay. I also noticed that maybe Germans are a little hesitant to talk, unless you get them in the right setting. Just to talk, that's why I just had you say one word. But what I found is that, here's an example. I used to lead a men's Bible study at a small restaurant in St. Louis when I was a pastor there. And I would try to and it was a bunch of old guys, just like you. And I would try to get these guys to talk. And they just would they didn't want to talk. They said, Pastor, you just tell us. But one day I came in, and they started talking about that TV show. You remember, maybe you've seen it, the Big Bang Theory? Raise your hand, have you seen the Big Bang Theory? What are some of the characters in there? What is it? Sheldon and who else? Howard and Leonard. These guys are like 75 years old, and they started talking about Sheldon and Howard and Leonard, and they just, the conversation just flowed. They were talking about these people like they were really, that time when Sheldon did this, and then Leonard said that. The conversation just flowed. You know why? Because all of them at that moment in their lives had been recently immersed in that story. They had found it together, and they were binge watching it. And it was the easiest thing in the world for them to talk about. These old, strong-willed German guys. And that was the insight for me. And hopefully we've experienced it, and we're starting to experience it even now. Spiritual conversations feel weird, they feel hard. But if you're immersed in the story, it's the most natural thing to do. I hope you experienced that it was pretty easy to talk about Jesus right there with a fellow Christian here, because you just heard the story. You were immersed in the story. And so whatever stories we immerse ourselves in, that's what we're going to talk about. And so again, if we want to help, if we want to be more eager in our conversation and invite Jesus into our conversations, it's not just feeling guilty or wanting to work harder at this. We have to go back to the basics and just listen to the story and be immersed in it. So I think that's one important insight as we go forward in how to face these challenges that 3 out of 4 Christians are reluctant to talk about their faith. Well, maybe we need to go back and just keep listening to the stories of Jesus as they're given to us in the Gospels. One resource that's related to this from Lutheran Hour Ministries, have you heard of this book, The Reluctant Witness? Have you read it? I recommend you read it. This is a really good book. And as John Ortberg is a pretty well-known Presbyterian pastor, and he says The Reluctant Witness is the best book on evangelism I have read in years. And this is from Lutheran Hour Ministries. I'd check it out. Discovering the delight of spiritual conversations. So that's one resource that I highly recommend. Okay, let's do this some more. There's another part of the story. So same drill. Listen again. Maybe you could focus on a word or a phrase that you hear or a moment or a scene, whatever it is, a feeling, a thought. What's the place in the story that got you? And then when it's time, you just put your hand on your partner's shoulder and say, the place in the story that got me was, and I want you to practice that. Let's all practice that. What's the place in the story that got you? Say that. Did you say that last time? Or did you just kind of, see, I think sometimes we just start talking, and we start talking theology, and we start telling all the things that we know about the theology in the Bible. Ask them what the place in the story that it was, what detail that got you this time. All right, so make sure you do that this next time. Listen for the place in the story that gets you. We're picking up now in Luke chapter 20, late part of 22, getting into 23 now. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody started to mock him, insult him, while they beat him up. They put a blindfold around his face, and they kept questioning him, saying, "Prophesy, who is it that hit you?" Now in the morning, all the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the scribes, assembled together, and Jesus was led before them, and they asked him, "If you are the Christ, the Messiah, tell us." And he said to them, "If I were to tell you, you wouldn't believe me. And if I were to ask you, you wouldn't answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be sitting at the right hand of the power of God." And they said to him, "So you are the Son of God." And he said, "You yourselves are saying that I am." And they said to each other, "What further witnesses do we need? We've heard the blasphemy from his own mouth." And all the assembly arose and led him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. And they began to say to Pilate, "We found this man misleading our nation and trying to stop us from giving tribute to Caesar and saying that he himself is a king, the Christ, the Messiah." And Pontius Pilate said to Jesus, "You are the king of the Jews?" And he said to all of them, the crowds and the chief priests, "I find no guilt in this man." But they kept on insisting, saying, "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee, and he's come all the way here." Now when Pilate heard this, he said, "Is he really from Galilee?" And when he learned that the man was under Herod's authority, he sent him to Herod, who himself was in Jerusalem during these days. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was really happy because for a long time he had wanted to see him, and he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign performed by Jesus. And so Herod questioned Jesus at great length. But Jesus gave him no answer. And the chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And after Herod and his soldiers mocked him and insulted him, they threw some brightly colored clothing around him and sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends that day because before this they had been enemies. Then Pilate assembled all the chief priests and the elders and all the people, and he said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, I did not find him guilty of any of the charges that you brought against him. And look, there is nothing in him deserving of death, so I will punish him and release him." But they started shouting, saying, "Not this one. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection in the city, rebellion, and for murder. And so Pilate said to them again, because he wanted to release Jesus, he spoke to them again. And then they started shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify!" And Pilate spoke to them a third time, saying, "Why? What evil has he done? There is no guilt in him deserving of death. Therefore, I will punish him and release him." But they kept on pressing in on him and shouting that he should be crucified. And their voices prevailed. And so Pilate judged that their decision, their demand should be granted. And he released for them the one for whom they asked, a man who'd been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder. And he delivered Jesus over into their will. Leading Jesus out, they grabbed hold of Simon from Cyrene. He was just coming in from the countryside. And they put the cross on him to carry it behind Jesus. And there were a great number of people following him, and many women mourning and lamenting for him. And Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Because the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' And in that day they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' Because if they do these things when the wood is green, what will they do when it is dry?" And there were two others, criminals, who were led out to be put to death with him. They came to the place called the Skull, and there they crucified him with the two others, the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. But Jesus kept on saying, "Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. Forgive them because they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by watching. And the elders and the rulers kept on mocking at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself. If he is the Christ, the Messiah." And the soldiers also were mocking him, coming up to him, offering him a cup of sour wine, saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourselves." And there was the inscription over him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." And then one of the criminals who were hanged with him started railing at him, saying, "If you're the King of the Jews, save us and yourself." But the other spoke against him. He said to him, "Have you no fear of God, since you're under the same sentence of condemnation? And we, rightly so. We're getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." And then he started to say, "Jesus, remember me. Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." It was now the 6th hour. It's around noon. And darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour, because the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two down the middle. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. And the centurion there, when he saw what happened, he started glorifying God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." And all the crowds who had come out for this spectacle, when they saw what had happened, they turned back, beating their breasts. And his acquaintances and the women who had come with him from Galilee, they stood there at a distance, watching these things. The gospel of the Lord. What was the place in the story that got you? Go ahead, ask your partner. All right, let's bring it together again. Would you share a word to summarize what you got on your heart and mind? What's a word from a reaction to what you heard or what you talked about? What is it? Unbelievable. What else? Blindfold. Yeah. Satan, yeah, he says, this is your hour and the authority of darkness. Forgiveness. Father, it's like Luke has been telling this account, and then now in chapter 23, the whole thing is led up to this moment. And what does Jesus say? Curse these people? No. Forgive them. And the verb, Luke says, it's an imperfect verb. He kept on saying, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. What else? Compassion. Yeah, compassion. Knowledge of your guilt, yeah. Glorifying God. Right, Luke's been really careful who glorifies God. The angels in the beginning, when they announced his birth, were glorifying God. And now a pagan enemy is glorifying God. The centurion at the end. What else?
How he answered the questions was almost like, because of what they believed or thought, it was like begging for his death.
Yeah.
It just ticked them off.
Yeah.
He said, ticked them off, which brought him, he was walking the road to death. I mean, he had that.
Yeah.
Instead of, and it's back to where he didn't ask to be, he didn't demand to be rescued. I know he had asked the Lord for the cup to be passed, but he went straight ahead, right into the line of fire.
Right. Now he knows this is his Father's will. He knew this from before, and that prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane is the deepest mystery perhaps we have in our scriptures. But he is going forward, doing his Father's work, and nothing's going to stop him. Yeah. One thing I notice in this is Jesus does a lot of talking in the whole Gospel of Luke and on the other Gospels, but he does very little talking. And here's another insight that I think that helps us when we think about how are we going to make disciples in our time, in our day and age. An insight that I gained and learned from this passion narrative is sometimes we have to stop telling and just simply show. If people aren't going to listen, you just show them. And maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe our society doesn't want to hear from us for whatever reason. So we just show them. Show them the sacrificial love of Jesus by what we do, just like he did. And only by his power and grace can we do that. Sometimes you just have to stop telling and show. All right, and some resources that we have from Lutheran Hour Ministries. Have you heard of this book, The Spiritually Vibrant Home? I'd recommend this one. This maybe is in that showing. So it's not just about putting out mass media about Jesus and his love, but it's by first practicing it in our own homes, by our devotional practices, by our spiritual conversations in the home, and by our hospitality. Probably the best thing that we could do to show someone the love of Jesus in this time, in this day and age, is to invite them over to your house for dinner. Invite a neighbor who doesn't know Jesus over and just show them through your hospitality the love of Jesus. That could be probably a very powerful and impactful thing for somebody. So that's one resource that I recommend as Lutheran Hour Ministries is trying to not just tell but show, to gain a hearing for the gospel. Another resource that I recommend that has just come out. So these three books I've showed are a trilogy. This one, have you heard of this one, The Hopeful Neighborhood? Okay, it's a little bit newer. Read this. Check it out. The Hopeful Neighborhood, What Happens When Christians Pursue the Common Good. This is really the book where we're trying to talk about what that would look like in an everyday sense, in a local sense, to show people the love of Jesus, not just tell them. Because sometimes you just need to show and stop talking. Even the Lord did it. Okay, well, we're going to jump ahead and end with Easter. I don't want to just stop at Luke 23, because Luke 24 is so good, and there's another insight in here that is really important. Okay, so let's just pause Lent for a moment, and we're just going to jump into Easter. Is that okay? All right. Same thing, listen for the place in the story that gets you. This is Luke 24 now. It's actually the end of 23 into 24. Luke says, now look, there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He was a good man and a righteous man. He did not consent to their decision and action regarding Jesus, and he was waiting. He was looking for the kingdom of God. And this man, Joseph, went to Pilate and requested the body of Jesus. And he took it down from the cross, wrapped it in a linen shroud, and placed him in a tomb, cut from stone where no one had yet been placed. Now it was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. And the women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body had been placed in it. And turning back from the tomb, they went to prepare the spices and the ointments for burial. And though on the one hand they rested on the Sabbath day, according to the commandment, on the other hand, on the first day of the week, early in the morning, they came to the tomb, bringing the spices that they had prepared. And they found that the stone had been rolled away. And they went in and they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And it happened while they were still perplexed about this. Look, two men appeared to them clothed in radiant clothing, and they were startled and they fell with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why are you seeking the living one among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and after 3 days rise." And they remembered what he had said to them. And going from the tomb, they announced to the 11 and all the rest, all that had happened. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the other women who kept on telling the apostles these things. But their words sounded to them like an idle tale, like foolish talk. And the apostles kept on disbelieving them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb, and stooping down, he sees the grave clothes by themselves. And going back, he began to marvel to himself about what had happened. Now it happened that very day, two of the disciples of Jesus, were walking on the road to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking about these things that had happened. And while they were walking along and discussing and conversing, it happened that Jesus himself drew near and started walking along with them. But their eyes were held back, and they did not know him. They didn't recognize him. And he said to them, "What are these words that you are exchanging with one another as you walk along?" And they stood still, looking sad. And one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "You're the only visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that happened there in these days?" And Jesus said to him, What things? And they said to him, the things about Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, how our chief priests and rulers delivered him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him, but we were hoping that he was the one who would redeem Israel. And also, besides all this, some of our women from our group amazed us. After they went to the tomb early in the morning, they didn't find his body there. They came back telling us that they had seen a vision of angels who were saying that he is alive. And some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see Jesus. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and the prophets, he thoroughly explained to them everything in the scriptures written about himself. They came to the village where they were walking. And Jesus acted as though he were going to keep walking. And they strongly urged him, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now far gone." So he went in and stayed with them. And it happened. He was reclining at the table with them. After he took bread and blessed it, after he broke it, he was giving it to him, and their eyes were opened. And they recognized him. They knew him. And he vanished from their sight. And they started to say to one another, "Was not our heart burning within us as he talked with us on the road and he opened to us the scriptures?" And rising up in that very hour, they went back to Jerusalem. 7 miles back to Jerusalem, and they found the apostles, the 11 apostles and those who were with him. And the apostles said to the two, "The Lord is really risen, and he appeared to Simon." And the two said to them about what had happened on the road and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. And while they were discussing these things, Jesus himself stood among them, and he says to them, "Peace be with you." And they were startled and frightened. They were thinking that they were seeing a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why are doubts arising in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I. Touch me and see. Because the spirit does not have flesh and bone, as you see that I have." And after he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they were still marveling about this and disbelieving from joy, he said to them, "Do you have anything to eat?" And they gave him some broiled fish. And he took it and he ate it in front of them. And then he said to them, "These are my words when I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." And he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. And then he said to them, "So it is written that the Christ must suffer and after 3 days rise, and that repentance, turning back to God for the forgiveness of sins, must be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning at Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. And look, I will send the promise of my Father upon all of you. So stay in the city until you are clothed with power from on high." And leading them out, as far as Bethany. He lifted up his hands on them and he blessed them. And while he was blessing them, he was taken from them, carried into heaven. And they worshiped him. They worshiped him. And returning to Jerusalem with great joy in their hearts, they were continually in the temple, blessing God. The gospel of the Lord. It's almost time for me to be done. So I'll ask you to say what got you in the story to your partner or to anybody else during a break. Last insight to share with you that I get from especially Luke chapter 24. It pleases God to spread the gospel, how fast? At the speed of relationships. This is how the Lord wants to do it. This is how it pleases him. He will take a 7-mile walk with someone and chat with them. He will take his time because the gospel is relationships. First and foremost with God through Jesus and the Spirit, and then with each other. So God is pleased to spread the gospel at the speed of relationships. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, there are so many things that are overwhelming to us as we look at your call to continue to be witnesses in this time. We admit we are not up for this. We have failed in so many ways. And so as we return and hear what you've done for us, who you are and what you're still doing, what you've promised, we ask that we would wait and be clothed with power from on high by your Spirit as we hear your word, that we could be your witnesses, that we could see every relationship with every person as a way to witness to you and to show and tell of your love for them. And all God's people said, amen. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me share that with you, and we'll see you around. All right? 1:15.